So welcome to veev. My name, for those of you who don't know me, is Cami Bamey, and I am CEO of veev. And this is kind of our weekly series, a weekly training series we call In the Know. Tonight we're going to talk about reshaping an industry. This is a little bit of a complement with a video that we shared yesterday, and it's with Kevin Manley, who's our CTO, and he and I talk a little bit about how this company came to be. If you haven't seen that already, you can search it on YouTube. Just search for veev Network, or if you are a consultant, we sent out some emails with some links to that. So if you haven't seen that, I recommend you do. It's a good base and a good foundation for how we came to be and how we came to meet each other. All right, so moving on, this is a weekly series that we have every Monday at 7. The next 2 weeks coming up. Next week, we actually have a really exciting week. Monday, our website is going to be going live, which means pre-enrollment for our AutoPilot product for all customers, as well as online enrollment for consultants goes live. So next week at 7, we're going to be doing a little bit of a walkthrough of the new website and pre-enrollment. And in 2 weeks, we're going to introduce some really exciting home products that we have planned for our launch. So don't miss those. All right, so to dive in, just to set the stage for this one, you can see a word here up on stage that we all, or on screen that we all use, that we're all familiar with, called innovate. And I wanted to start with what the definition of that word is. So we talk about and we hear about innovation a lot, but the actual dictionary definition is to make changes in something established, especially by introducing a new method. So tonight I'm going to walk you through what we think is a new method. Something that is going to make changes to this energy industry that's already established. And you'll see how really significant it could be. The energy industry has already produced some massive companies. It's produced an entire industry with tens of thousands of jobs. But really, we're just scratching the surface of what we could be doing within this industry. And I'm going to show you how we think that structurally there's something just missing that is going to be the missing link that's going to really make this work for all the players in the industry. Part of this came from an event that we attended recently. Kevin and I both attended this. I was a invited guest on the CEO panel. This is called the EMC Conference, or the Energy Marketers Conference. It was an absolute honor to be there. It was a pleasure to be not only featured on the panel, but just to be there and to be talking among colleagues and peers in the energy industry. So just to set the stage a little bit for what this event was all about. This was, there are about 600 people who attend. I would say 60% of those, 60 to 65% of those are retail energy suppliers. So they're the people that are actually supplying people in these third-party markets. And the remainder was made up of a mix of people, vendors, technology companies, regulators, brokers, aggregators, and so the focus of my panel and the group of us that were on this panel, the moderator asked us to focus on the things you see up there. So we focused on advice for startups, you know, the future of the industry, issues, threats, and challenges, the regulatory environment, how to galvanize customers, how to attract non-switchers. So this was an interesting experience for me. I have been attending these types of conferences now for about 7 or 8 years. I've been a panelist at a couple of them, but usually wearing a different hat. Usually I was coming to an event like that as a third-party supplier and, you know, looking at it a little bit differently. But I can say that the themes have been the same. The themes have been much of what you see up on the screen there. It's an industry that really has, I think, the future in their sights, an industry that wants to be able to provide more and more customers with energy choice. But for reasons that I'll get into in this presentation, it's just not working. And so consistently, there seems to be these themes about, in particularly the regulatory environment. That's a big one that comes up a lot. Because even though it's deregulated energy, there's still a lot of regulations that anybody in this industry has to adhere to. You've got to be licensed. You've got to follow all the rules and regulations. You've got to make sure you know which customers can and can't switch. And so there seems to be this overriding topic kind of year after year of how do we galvanize consumers, which is the phrase that's used. You know, how do we excite more customers? How do we attract more customers? How do we galvanize consumers so that we can then go to the regulators and get favorable regulations? And you know, so on this panel, it was fun. I got a chance to be a little bit provocative and challenge conventional wisdom, which is one of my favorite things to do, and to kind of put the question back on the industry. back on the industry to say, well, I don't think that's the right question. I think that in any walk of life, whether you're talking about politics or education or somebody's career, you don't galvanize people who aren't excited. What you do is you excite people and you attract people with real value or with something that matters. And then that in turn leads to this groundswell. And so if the question is, how do we get more customers engaging in this industry? It can't start with, hey, customer, we want you to engage in this industry. It has to start with, hey, customer, we've solved a problem for you. And because we've solved a problem for you, naturally and organically, we're going to start to get that groundswell that we need. So I'm really a firm believer in this industry, and that's what I tried to get across in this panel, is it's not about whether the industry is broken, it's about how do we correct the subtle things that are, how do we make the little tweaks so that we can move forward with a vengeance, really. And then the other big thing was how to attract non-switchers. And there again, deregulation's been around for about 20 years. You'll see that in a minute. But people are still not switching. There's still this massive group of non-switchers. And again, to me, the question is obvious. It's actually duh. I don't know if you can see it in my window or not. There's a little sign right there. It says duh. I don't mean that in a rude way or sarcastic way. I just mean if something makes sense, do it. If something doesn't make sense, don't do it. Duh. And to me, if you're not attracting non-switchers, then you don't have something of value. So what I really focused on in this panel were these three key themes, and I kept coming back to them over and over again. And they were these three things that you see up here. Number one is relevance. You can't ever take your relevance for granted. I don't care what business you're in or what you're doing or even a relationship that you have. If you have a really great friendship or a tight relationship and you stop communicating with that person, you become irrelevant. And I think the same is true in businesses. In any industry, any business, you cannot take for granted yesterday's success. So number one to me was relevance. How do we ensure that we are remaining, oops, I've lost my screen. Give me 1 second. All right. How do we make sure that we are remaining as an industry relevant? And number two is customer bias. As an industry, if we don't approach things with a customer bias, then we won't remain relevant, because customers ultimately are what are going to drive this industry. And the third one was overcoming prejudice with excellence. So yes, of course, there's prejudices in this industry. There's prejudices in any industry, in particular ways of selling, in some products. Absolutely. So you either ignore those prejudices and that becomes an irrelevant industry because we all have better things to do with our time, or you address those with a customer bias and a customer slant and you become relevant again. So these are the three key things, and I'll come back to these throughout the webinar that you'll see have really been percolating in our thoughts here and driving a lot of our strategy. So to move on a little bit and talk to you about kind of structurally, I'm going to do a little energy 101. I'm assuming most of the people on this webinar know this, but maybe not. We do have quite a few newbies here. So just a little bit of history, super basics, right? So you've got energy produced at a power plant, energy is fed into the grid, and then energy is brought to the customers, right? Super basic. I mean, obviously there's some other details in there and ISOs and wheeling and natural gas and yada, yada. But you've got three basic things. You make energy, you put it on the grid, you take it to somebody's house. So that's been existing in some way, shape, or form since the dawn of electricity. So in the late 1990s is when deregulation began. So you've heard us say, hey, 20 years later. And that's true, it is 20 years later, but the first kind of 5 to 10 years of that was just getting suppliers to want to engage in the market, was figuring out what the connections to the utility would be, kind of that market structure. But deregulation begins, and here's basically what it does. So it essentially takes those three categories and divides them into generation, transmission and delivery, and consumption. So you've got power producers and generators. This is anybody, whether it's green, whether it's brown, regardless of the source. You've got coal plants, wind farms, solar, whatever, out there making energy, right? And then you have that energy just coming into the grid, and you got the local utility that is maintaining the lines and delivering that energy. And then you've got you and me and every other homeowner and business out there that's consuming that energy, right? So that's your little ecosystem. So what deregulation said was, hey, you know what? Why don't we create an opportunity, a space in the market, literally, create a little space, divide these things up, create a space for something we're going to call supply. So now we've got retail energy suppliers that can buy and sell energy, right? And that's effectively all that deregulation was. So if you look at it, you think, well, wait a minute, didn't we just create a sort of an extra step here? We already had the energy going from the generator to the transmission and delivery. Why do we need this extra little step here? Well, if you're a regulator or you're a politician or you're somebody who's looking into why deregulate a state, right? There's a few different reasons. So first and foremost, I think the biggest one is when you have that monopoly utility. There's very little incentive that they have to actually innovate or change value or even operate efficiently. And then number two, you've got, really kind of akin to that, it's going to take market forces to say, hey, here's something new, here's something different. So if you're the one setting those rules in the late 1990s, what you're hoping for is competition, which ultimately is going to lead to more innovation and more options for consumers. And ultimately, that's going to lead to, hopefully, value-added services that create better options. And that's going to lead to, at an aggregate level, driving down cost. So boiled down very, very simply, why deregulate? Well, it's to create choice. So ultimately, choice is good. But here's one of the other themes that I talked quite a bit about at the conference, which is choice for choice's sake is not a virtue. Maybe in the early days it was. And you'll see in some charts here, I think, pretty compelling evidence that choice for choice alone grabs a handful of people. But it doesn't get the rest of people that want choice because they're looking for, okay, but why do I want to make that choice? So from a customer's perspective, why deregulate? Well, it's pretty simple. You got the old way. You had your local utility company and you got one choice. And you got the new way. You got supplier 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, however many. There's 199 now in one of the states. That's the one with the most. 199 suppliers. That's kind of a fun little factoid for you. How in the world are you supposed to choose between that? So you have lots of choice. So now you got a customer who's going, yeah, sure, okay, I like the new way. I like choice. Given the choice between choice or no choice, what are you going to choose? You're going to choose choice. That was a lot of choices in one sentence. In any case, so you've got fixed, variable, do you want fixed, do you want variable, do you want green, do you want brown, do you want a national company, a local company, do you want to bundle it, do you want perks, do you want discounts? So this was kind of the promise of deregulation. So 20 years later, you think, yeah, that's pretty cool. I would imagine quite a few people have switched, right? Well, I'm probably talking to a group who already knows the answer, but if I said how many have switched, it's actually pretty low. So we have in an entire kind of landscape of 55 million homes, you've got about 30% or so that have made that switch. That's crazy. That's crazy this far in. That's a symptom. That says something needs to change. But I think we've got to have a goal. We've got to have a goal of 100%. We need 100% of people switching. So if that's the goal, I need to build a case for why that can happen. And that's the point of tonight. So just to kind of see that spread, I'll tell you, I had a hard time believing 30%. I thought, no, it's got to be higher. So I've got super recent data here. This was released just in February of 2018. This is from DNVGL. They're actually they're international, but they're the nation's leading energy research firm. And this is from their Retail Energy Outlook, which was as of December 31st of last year. So here's some charts that I think will illustrate this for you in a pretty interesting way. So this first one is all deregulated markets. So this is everywhere in aggregate, including Texas, mind you, which is 100% switched because it's a different structure. So in all deregulated markets altogether, you've got 28% switched. So 30% is actually high, which is crazy. So that means you've got 16 million people with a supplier and 43 million people without. So if we look at that on a state-by-state basis, it's pretty interesting. The other thing that I kind of get a lot is, well, hey, isn't that different in commercial? Isn't commercial all switched? Well, sure, it's higher, but take a guess. If you're kind of thinking to yourself how high you think this is in the commercial space. Well, it's actually not that much higher. I was surprised by this. It's 43%. So you have 3.9 million businesses in this deregulated footprint that still have not switched. And I can tell you that the vast majority of that 3.9 are in the small to medium business segment. So what we have seen happening is we've got the large C&I, the big users, the people that have a full-time energy procurement person on staff. And we've got the homes and businesses that have kind of been left to fend for themselves. And then in the middle, you've got the small to medium business segment that everybody's kind of like, we don't know what to do with you. So massive opportunity there where you've got 3 to 4 million businesses that are still with the utility. The other thing as we go through these charts that I want you to think about Just because somebody's switched doesn't mean they're not a great target market. In fact, they're often a better target market. And I've got a slide about that in a minute. But if you look through here, just looking in the Northeast, there are a few states that have some growth. So here's Maine. You can see it's got some growth. It's at 35% switched, and that leaves about 1.8 million people that could still make a choice. You've got Rhode Island that still had some growth. So that's sitting at 13% switched, which means it's a tiny state, but there's still 368,000 people in Rhode Island. So huge opportunity. You've got New Hampshire that's seen modest little growth in peaks there in recent years, 15% switched, and 652,000 still with the utility. But for the most part, you see growth curves that look like this. For the most part, you see things where you've got New Jersey. New Jersey, massive state, massive opportunity, 14% switched. So you think about some of the dynamics that occur in states like this. Here's a state with 3 million people who are still with the utility. And one of the things is there's not really a great rate board. That's one of the simple reasons that New Jersey hasn't seen the penetration. And so it's harder for people to make a decision there. So you see other states like Pennsylvania. This is a really common shape up here where you know, people kind of made an initial choice. So earlier I said that choice for choice sake is not a virtue, but you can see on a lot of these where when a market just initially opened and was initially deregulated, then people kind of jumped at the chance. Oh my gosh, I can make a choice. I'm going to do it, right? And then as some of the challenges kick in, that starts to taper off. So Pennsylvania is sitting at 29% with 4.2 million people still with utility. Illinois had a big tapering off in recent years, as you can see. So Illinois is sitting at 37%, and that's 3.4 with the utility. Maryland, massive stagnation there in Maryland, only 15%. So Maryland kind of shot out like a rocket in 2009, 2010, 2011. Those years kind of, you know, scaled up really quickly and then sat stagnantly. So you still have in Maryland 2.5 million homes still with the utility. All of these numbers that I'm giving you right here, by the way, are residential only. So the only commercial chart that I included was that first one that's an aggregate. Everything else I'm focusing only on residential, but the patterns, the curves are virtually identical with the two segments. The only difference is commercial is just slightly higher, but really, really, really similar. So Connecticut, now in Connecticut, we see some dropping here. So you see it actually shot up to close to 50. It was one of the, behind Texas, it was one of the most penetrated states. And today it's sitting at 32% with still 882,000 people still with the utility. So what's really fascinating to me about this, if you look at all of these together, in summary, we have all these markets either on decline or in stagnation. And here's what's interesting, going back to this event that I was at. One of the things that I hit on, I think, pretty hard in my panel, just before my panel, there was a whole panel on international expansion. And I love the idea of international expansion. It's great if you can offer service in other places, if you can expand a business. But there were so many companies and some live audience polling and a bunch of people talking about how they're jumping into these other spaces. And the word I kept hearing, and it was just, every time I'd hear it, I would just go, what? The word I kept hearing was saturation. That people were going to international markets because they felt that the US was in saturation mode. And I don't know about you, but I don't call 15 to 30% saturated, nowhere close, especially when in a lot of these markets, you've actually got a decline. We're not in saturation. We're in a mode where we need innovation. We're in a mode where we need a new method. And I think that there's a tremendous opportunity because people are kind of stuck in this industry not knowing how do we get those non-switchers. Well, we know. So it's kind of interesting to me. So here's a summary for those of you who are veev consultants, just to give you a sense of the opportunity we have. These are just our phase one markets alone. So Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, New Hampshire, those 5 markets that we will be able to pre-enroll as of a week from today, and then going live sometime in early Q2. So in those markets, you've got 15 million meters, and you're sitting at about 21% switch rate. So really phenomenal opportunity here. Basically, that means we're just shy of 80% who don't have a supplier, and that's 12 million homes. I should say homes, not people. But amazing opportunity in just our pre-launch states. So moving on here a little bit, the real question for me as a business owner, as a human, as a strategist, is why aren't more people making the choice? Well, in some ways it's kind of obvious, but in some ways it's not. So I just want to highlight this a little bit. So I talked about this consumer who had the new way and the old way and the new way. And choice in and of itself seems great, but are there too many choices? The first switch is hard enough. So think about if you are in the 30% who has switched on this call, think about what you've got to go through for your first switch. You got to research and select your supplier. Then once you've found a supplier that you like, you've got to find the plans and find one you're comfortable with. Then you've got to go through what is a pretty complicated enrollment and verification process. Then you've got to interpret your bill, try to find all the little pieces of data that somebody wants. You've got to complete all the verifications, and then you wait, and you hope you get switched on time and correctly. And that's one switch. That's one switch. That could be for 6 months, that could be for 12 months, that could be for 4 months, that could be for whatever. That's one switch. Now, the second time, unless you just hang out there and hope that works out well for you, the second time, you got to do that all over again and again and again. And I've met people who do this successfully, who do essentially what we do with our flagship product, AutoPilot, but most people just can't do that. And the worst part is if you forget to manage that, then you potentially can fall into unfavorable terms, which is not great. So looking overall at the results. So here's kind of what's happening and what it's leading to. So you've got hundreds of suppliers. Remember, 199 in one state. That still blows my mind. Hundreds of suppliers, but very little variance in plan types. So you would think that, say hi to my garbage man. So you would think that, thank you, have a good night. You would think that with hundreds of suppliers that you would have hundreds of options and a diversity of options. The reality is that's not the case. And any of you who've looked, there are differences, but they kind of look the same, and there's really hidden terms. So you've got all these suppliers, but really very little actual choice. Very little focus on technology and customer experience. My favorite quote from I had so many funny anecdotes. My favorite quote from the event was a gentleman who was up there speaking on behalf of a supplier, and he was talking about millennials and what millennials want. And he quoted something that said that they want a stellar digital experience. And I don't think he meant to chuckle, but he did. He chuckled and he goes, whatever that means. Like these crazy millennials are too hard to please. They want a stellar digital experience. I'm like, what do you mean whatever that means? It means the same way you interact with your technology, the way you get on Netflix, the way you get on Hulu, the way you get on your Apple, the way you get on any social media. That's what we expect. I don't care if you're a millennial or an Xennial or a Gen X or a baby boomer. I don't care. Doesn't everybody expect a stellar? Anyway. Sorry for the rant and the tangent, but very little focus on technology and customer experience leads to what? A frustrating process. So then you have heavy focus on acquiring a customer. And this was the other one I sat and listened to. And again, I've been to these for years. It's not like anything was different this time. A panel on marketing. And the panelists on marketing typically talk about how to get that first new customer. It's a discussion around where are they getting their lists and what methods have the lowest cost of acquisition and how do they, rank door-to-door versus telemarketing. And so there's all this focus on acquiring a customer, which means what? The customers are fatigued, they're disengaged, they're tired of it. And it's like people are tone deaf. No, I've heard about that. I've got 200 other people knocking on my door, no thank you. But then there's too little focus on keeping a customer. So it's one thing to focus on your marketing efforts as just getting a customer, but if you're not focusing on keeping them, now you've got frustrated customers and churn. And hence, so many of those charts going up and then back down, up and then back down, because that's what's going to happen as an industry. And then what happens overall? Relevance. We have no relevance. So the final thing is media reactions, which then lead to regulator reactions. So what you're seeing on this slide here was the case I actually made to the attendees at this conference. I said, we actually had to take a hard look at the things that we've been saying year after year after year after year. Yes, we got to excite non-switchers, and yes, we have to grow this, but what are we actually doing to do that? What's our new method? What's changing? We keep doing these same things and we keep getting the exact same output. Same input, same output, surprise! So in any case, to boil this down to its simplicity, if you look at customer perception, if you were around when this industry was first taking off, the headlines that we saw were awesome. You have a choice. Deregulation promises competition. Market opens up and promises options for customers. I mean, it was news story after news story after news story talking about how great this industry is. Well, now if you search and you find any kind of article on deregulation, what are you going to find? You're going to find customer beware, understand your options. Is deregulation still working? And so this is the thing where I think it's a classic case of a great opportunity for an innovator to come in here. So I'll remind us for a second, before I go into this next little part, our goal here is 100%. That's our goal, 100%. If you're going to have a deregulated market, then you want to make sure that every single customer can benefit from that. So if that's your goal, where do you go from here? Well, this is something called the technology adoption curve, something that you're probably familiar with. And most technologies, most new structure in industry, anything that's really new, goes through this same kind of curve. Innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, laggards. Incidentally, those first two kind of columns are typically somewhere around 2 decades. It's honestly, it's mind-boggling, but it's true. You can do the research, cell phones, TVs. So much that came from kind of first introduction to then later adoption takes quite a while, unless you're talking about just the internet technologies that are a little quicker today. But you can see there's actually a white gap there. That white gap is known as the chasm. It's a pretty familiar concept where it's kind of easy to get to this first stage, to jump that chasm, to cross that bridge, to get over into early majority, late majority, and laggards to where you really want to be. Remember, our goal is 100%. We got to get up that hump and down the other side. And if our goal is 100%, we've got to figure out how do we cross the chasm. That's the key, right? And so ultimately, I believe firmly that this industry is at an inflection point. All right, what we see from here on out, if you look at all those charts, you can do a forecast, and analysts have. They've looked at forecasts of what's going to happen with deregulation. Most of them forecast stagnation or decline, which is why everybody's running overseas. So if you look at an inflection place, I believe there's 3 scenarios. So you've got number 1, all the customers go back to the utility. They're disinterested in switching because it's a hassle to manage. So that's decline, right? Number 2, the same sort of 30% or less just keep switching. They just keep churning round and around and around, and we have basically status quo. That's stagnation. Number 3 is innovation, and innovation leading to growth. And clearly that's what I believe is going to happen, but it only can happen if you're fixing some of the structural problems. So here's why I think that's the case. Here's why I say often that this isn't hyperbole, that this is really an industry that is primed for change and our innovation is going to do it. This is why I say that. So here's this chart that we had earlier, all right? So we talked about this already. We have generation, supply, transmission and delivery, consumption, the customers can choose. Well, there's a fundamental flaw with this structure, if you think about it. So to show you what the flaw is, I have to show you first how a retail energy supply business operates. And I talked to the attendees about this as well. I said, think about your business for a minute. Think about each of you who run a retail supply business. You both ultimately have 3 things that you got to pay attention to. So first, you got to pay attention to energy procurement and pricing, and that's no simple task. That's a trading floor, that's hedgers, that's people who are watching weather curves, that's people who know when a liquefied natural gas shipment from Australia is later delayed and somehow that makes the wholesale curve higher. I mean, this is not a simple task. That's a business in and of itself. That's why this tends to be an industry that is dominated by men. I hate to say that, but it's just true. Very few women there, but also by the financial industry, people who come from finance backgrounds. The second thing is operations and utility connection. Okay, cool. So now once you've bought that, now you've got to connect into the utility. You've got to do all your EDI and your billing. Also not a small task. Those 2 things are pretty interesting, and they're required to really create creativity because now you've got traders and hedgers and operations people. But there's a 3rd piece to this, and you can probably guess what it is. And it's the piece, unfortunately, that people don't think about enough. So you get a whole bunch of retail energy suppliers, and I said this to them in the room. I said, I really don't want to offend anybody, but look around the room right now. I want you all to raise your hand if you actually were trained or care about or are passionate about marketing and customer engagement. And everybody kind of chuckled because it's an industry that's like this necessary, I don't want to call it necessary evil, but it's like, oh crap, yeah, okay, now we've got our energy infrastructure, now we've got this, we got to go find customers, right? And so it's truly kind of disassociated with the core of their business. So look for a minute of how this overlays on the model of what deregulation has created. I love this. So if you think about this, the energy procurement and pricing and the operations and utility connection, they lay exactly where the retail energy supplier exists in the market. That's exactly where they are. That's exactly where they should be. But what does that do to customer retention? and acquisition and customer engagement. Well, it kind of leaves the customer off on their own. So structurally, there's a miss. Structurally, there's a gap. And this is where I get so excited about our model, because it's not just that we create a good process, it's that we are fundamentally changing an industry by creating this whole new thing called choice optimization or auto switching, whatever you want to call it, that I think has been missing. I think it's been missing for a lot of years. And so if you look at that, here's now what the model of a 2018 new method looks like. You still have the retail energy supplier, critical, they play a critical role. But we had so many phenomenal conversations, and I can't tell you how many suppliers really caught our vision of not just, hey, you keep doing your marketing thing, go door to door and telemarketing and everything else, and then we'll bring in some customers every now and again. No, what we were looking for was some true partners, some people who thought, wow, if veev is doing their job right, and if we get a lot of customers on AutoPilot powered by Utiliz, and we have people really using this platform, we can spend less on our traditional marketing avenues. But more than that, you can do a better job for us, because it has to work for suppliers. If it doesn't work for suppliers, this whole model is flawed, period. And we're all out of business tomorrow. So it was a phenomenal event to get that validation from suppliers to think that, wow, not only does this make sense from consumers, but yeah, they buy into this theory that there's a missing link here, that you guys can go optimize, you can become super good at the business of being an energy supplier, which should be two things: energy procurement, pricing, hedging, the business of being an energy company, and utility and connections. Let us take care of the customer. Let us play this choice optimization role, reduce everyone's costs, and finally fulfill the promise of deregulation. So you've heard us say before that every challenge is just an opportunity. And again, that's exactly what we think here. I've said this already, but deregulation is still very, very, very young. So we say it's 20 decades in, but as you see from those charts, the first decade was figuring out the structure. We're kind of 10 years in. We've had some starts and stops. We've had some early success, but ultimately choice is still better if you can give people a better choice. And so I think it's now time for market forces and innovation to step in and be the solution, which is exactly what we're doing. So I want to look back, this is fascinating to me, at crossing the chasm for a few other companies, a few other examples of companies, or not companies, rather industries that had to cross the chasm. Because if we can't jump that little gap there, then we don't have an industry. So let's start with a little thing here that probably every single one of you is either viewing this on or holding, called a cell phone. Let's look at a cell phone. So when a cell phone first started, they look like that. I'm happy to say that it's pretty far down that list or that picture before I actually owned one. I did own the little Motorola's and the little flip phones, but none of the big blocks. But in any case, so you think about cell phones and the predictions of the industry. In 1980, AT&T hired McKinsey, huge research firm and consultancy, to create kind of a market assessment and say, hey, how big is this market? Should we pay attention to it? Does it matter? And they said, yeah, it's kind of big. I think there's going to be 900,000 cell phones by 2000. Pretty big market opportunity. Well, anybody who's on this Zoom is probably chuckling a little bit, because by 2000, we had 109 million cell phones. So they were only off by 121 times. So that was a market that grew much faster than people thought, even though it took about 2 decades to really take hold. And this was at the time of that kind of chasm. All right, so now you've got the internet. This is one of my favorite articles from, from Newsweek. Actual article, not an actual cover. In full transparency, we mocked up the cover just for the visual here, but it was an actual article. And I'm looking for this quote I have because it's great. All right, so it said the internet bought, and then the headline was Hype Alert, Why Cyberspace Isn't and Will Never Be Nirvana. So I love this. I have to read this little quote here. This you should Google this if you haven't read it. It's really good for a good chuckle. But the author was really proud of himself, really, shooting down this whole crazy thing called the internet. So he said, after 2 decades online, I'm perplexed. So again, get that, after 2 decades. So this was written at the chasm. All right. Visionaries see a future of telecommuting workers, interactive libraries, and multimedia classrooms. They speak of electronic town meetings and virtual communities, commerce and business shifting from offices and malls to networks and modems. Baloney. First of all, who writes baloney? I'm going to figure out how to put that in a blog. He says, do our computer pundits lack all common sense? The truth is no online database will ever replace your daily newspaper. So yeah, clearly he was wrong. Wrong by how much? Well, today, as you know, we have 4.1 billion users online. So again, at the chasm, you've got all kinds of people who are going to be skeptics, and oftentimes it's based in reality because something really is wrong. It was clunky, it was hard to get on, it was slow, right? And he was commenting on some of the same kinds of things that exist within the energy deregulation industry. So this is a pretty cool one. I'm guessing maybe 2 to 5% of you know where this picture comes from, and I'll tell the rest of you a little story. This is a great example of just absolute, pure, unadulterated entrepreneurial hustle. So this was a little company that in the election where Obama was first running was really struggling, trying to get their company off the ground and couldn't find funding, just kept hitting lots of brick walls, people saying this concept's really not going to work, and they were funding it with their own money, and went to the Democratic convention and just had an idea to take advantage of this whole thing. Had nothing to do with their business, but decided to market these sort of souvenir collector cereal boxes and created Obama O's and Captain McCain's. Sold these for $40 a pop. Sold about 1,000 of them, raised $40,000 for capital for their business, literally went back to their office, cut these things out, and glued them together to fulfill orders of these cereal boxes to raise money for their little tech company. A little tech company that investors and media said, are people really going to do this? I would never do this, and got shot down over and over and over again. So I don't know if you have any guesses of who this is, but this little company is a company called Airbnb. Kind of big today. Kind of well known today. Today their stats are 3,100 employees, 150 million users, 4 million listings, $31 billion valuation. Raised money by hand cutting cereal boxes to sell during a national political campaign. That is serious hustle. I love that story so much. But also what they did, if you're not familiar with the Airbnb story, is the founder actually went to New York City. He realized one big point of friction that was happening in his industry, and it was all about the photo. Nobody was getting good photos, so nobody could trust these homeowners, and nobody would let anybody into their home. So he went to New York City and actually knocked on the door of his hosts, a bunch of them, and said, hey, we're going to send you a free photographer. And he went in, the free photographer was him and his partner. And they would stay with their host, and they would ask them what they wanted. And from that, they created this whole, what they call the 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, all the way up to 12-star customer experience. I told this story at the Retail Energy Conference just to say, and I had everybody raise their hands. And I said, I just want to know, we're talking about galvanizing consumers, and we're talking about attracting non-switchers. Raise your hands in this room for those of you who have actually been through your own customer experience in the last 6 months. Not a lot of them had, very few. So the point being that these companies and these industries, the cell phone, the internet, Airbnb, they didn't get successful because they said, hey guys, we got to galvanize consumers and figure out how to get them to use this. They got successful because they created something people wanted. And so if you look at what the difference is, what changed with cell phones, with the internet, with Airbnb, and you could do 6 or 7 other companies or 10, 15 other companies that are just like that hit that chasm, and either it works or it doesn't. But what's different is innovation, a customer focus, removing the hassle, and interdependence and smart collaborations. And if you do a case study on almost any industry or business that hits that mass adoption, those are the 4 things you're going to find. You're going to find things that are focused on removing the hassle, making it easier, and creating these really smart collaborations. Apple didn't grow as fast as it did by doing everything itself. It grew as fast as it did by creating an open source platform and partnering. So those are the exact same things that make us super confident that AutoPilot is going to be a disruptor. So we look at our change and our difference as the fact that we're going to have innovation, we've got customer focus, we've absolutely removed the hassle, and we have interdependence and smart collaborations. That one is so key with suppliers, and especially on the heels of this event, seeing how many people are really excited about our model from the supplier perspective gives us tremendous confidence that we're going to be able to work toward this. So back to one of the 3 key themes that I said I shared at this event is we will overcome prejudice with excellence. I believe this in so many walks of life. Whatever it is that you're struggling with, if you approach it with excellence, you'll overcome that. So I know there's a handful of you on here who aren't AutoPilot customers yet or pre-enrolled or aren't consultants. So just as a quick overview of what AutoPilot is and why it solves some of these problems. So first of all, we monitor the market. We focus on short-term contracts. We look out there, we find everything that's available. So all those choices, all those plans, we go look for that for our customers. We research the plans. What I mean by that is not just that we look at them and our technology has them all in a list. What I mean by that is that we look at them, that we make sure we understand the terms, that we make sure we understand if there's predatory practices or things that would be unfavorable. We really know not only the suppliers, but also the plans and the details of what we would be signing a customer up with. More importantly, what we really will do is sign people up in large cohorts with a plan that we have engineered in collaboration with one of our supplier partners, which is better for them and better for our customer. Then we select that plan and we enroll somebody. That process is totally automatic for our customer. On the very first switch, we do need to collaborate with the customer and make sure that we know when they're coming off their term, when their contract is ending. But we will, as soon as we understand those details, then we can automatically enroll them in their next term. From that point on, we manage that account. We're like a financial manager for the energy, and we work on behalf of the customer. So we can either switch somebody if we need to when their plan renews, or just renew them. It really depends. If we can keep somebody where they're at, then all the better. But we're going to do that by negotiating with the existing supplier, by making sure that the terms are still in the customer's best interests. At the end of the day, we are fierce defenders of our customers. And then the fifth thing that we do that is phenomenal is we make sure that everybody's making a responsible choice. There's so many green energy options out there. And I got to tell you, from somebody who knows what goes on to create a green energy plan, most of them are overcharging for green energy. The reality is the renewable energy industry has changed quite a bit, and you can get RECs affordably, and you can do it responsibly. So we decided that rather than making that an option, we're just going to include that in our subscription fee because we can. And we can do that still having a lifetime savings guarantee. And not immediately at launch, but shortly after, if we've got customers who want to increase that and up that to 100% renewable, we'll be able to allow people to do that as well. And the thing that I'm probably most excited about is that we keep people really updated, really updated. What plan are you with? What supplier are you with? You can log into your own personal portal. And if you have any of our other products and services, it's in the same portal. So we're going to keep our customers updated all along the way. And so really, if you think about what this does for a customer, just think about today. Think about the variety of choices and the mess and the confusion. You have to do it again every time. You have to worry about your term length. When is your meter read date? Do you have to set yourself a calendar reminder? Do you want green or brown? Are you being overcharged for green? If you want green, how do you make sure that they're actually buying the green RECs that they say they're going to? What's your enrollment verification period? I mean, how much is your ETF? I mean, it's just, this is why we're declining or stagnant. Versus AutoPilot, I'm just going to walk through these because I think they're so obvious. It's just truly a set it and forget it. But think about the concrete nature here. One enrollment, just one. Not every single time you're going to switch enroll. One time. Send us a pic of your bill and we'll take care of the rest. That's huge. Do you know, in my previous life, with a different hat on as a supplier, do you know there were often 18 to 20% of enrollments that didn't go through just because somebody keyed in a meter number wrong? Think about that experience. Somebody types in a meter number, they go along their way, they think they're enrolled, it rejects because it's a bad data, and then somebody's trying to get back in touch with them. No, it's on the top left-hand of your bill. Oh, I don't have my bill with me today. I'll call you back another day. Now I've got to go back through the verification process. You know, very challenging versus send us your bill. We'll do it for you. And then we'll watch the market, and then we pick your supply on your plan, and we do that. Ideally, we're going to do that in large groups. So ideally, we want customers to come to us in big groups because it's going to help us work with our supplier partners and create really great partnerships. And we make sure you're always renewed or switched on time and without penalty. And we automatically measure savings every year. That means you don't have to go looking through a bunch of old bills and sending us something at the end of the year and say, oh, we don't think we saved. That means we're going to do that automatically and tell you that. Really more often than yearly that you're getting updates on that because you're getting an email every single month. So the other thing I want to mention here is occasionally We can't serve a customer. Maybe they're in a bracket that is restricted by the regulator, or maybe we just think that they have a really great plan and we can't save them money. There's a Facebook forum that some of our existing customers through the Utiliz brand are on, and that was one of the things that they were really talking positively about is, what an amazing company that's going to say, hey, you're on a great plan. When this one expires, come back to us. But we can't save you money right now. So we really are very customer focused. And, our belief with that is we're going to keep people for years. There's really literally no reason to leave veev unless you're moving. And only then if you're moving out of our market areas. So we're really excited about that. And then, I talked earlier about how this works for switchers and not switchers. So the last few things I want to do here before we close out tonight is I want to talk about why this works for every single person. You hear me talk a lot about interdependence. You hear me talk about how it has to work for a whole ecosystem. So I'm just going to talk about for switchers versus non-switchers versus suppliers, just real quickly, because I think that to me, if I really have to close this whole webinar out, I told you that I'm going to build a case for why I think this is going to disrupt the energy. That's a big, bold claim. So if I'm going to actually build that case properly, you have to leave here knowing why it works for every single player. So for switchers already know they can choose. They already know that. They've done it. They want to take advantage of it. They've been through some of the pain points. We just make it a lot more simple, and we give people peace of mind. So they're getting the exact benefit they already wanted, which was savings or green. We're giving them both. And now they just get peace of mind. For non-switchers, people who have either somehow not heard that they can switch, there's still a lot of people like that, a lot actually, or people who haven't switched because they can't be bothered, or people who haven't switched because they don't trust it. We really get to say to them, listen, you're leaving money on the table. I get that it's been a hassle, but it's not anymore. So you do have the right to choose, and now you don't have to worry about how. We're going to take care of that for you. So think about that in your mind as a decision tree. Do you know you have an energy choice? Yes, no. Well, no, I don't. Well, hey, let me tell you, you do. And this is really easy. Well, yes, I do. Well, okay. Have you switched before? I mean, it's a fun little decision tree. We've actually talked about building that out for you. But the last one that I think is really important is, to me, this gives me a ton of confidence, especially coming out of this conference now and validating what we thought would be the case. And now we know it is the case of why does this work for suppliers? So these are our 4 pitches to suppliers. So we tell suppliers, first of all, we're going to increase the size of the market because we've got easy and safe enrollment and good customer service. So we're attracting non-switchers. Because again, that's the question they ask. How do we attract non-switchers? How do we galvanize customers? Number 2, we reduce your cost to acquire and your cost to serve. We do not charge an upfront acquisition fee. So that's baked into every supplier's rate. We've got clean enrollments without data errors. So that 18 to 20% of people that fail, that's cost. Every single one of those has to go through a verification. They all have a cost. And we eliminate support calls because our customers should be calling us. And really, they shouldn't be calling us because we're going to email them a whole bunch of stuff. But if they do have a problem, they're calling us. We work for the customer. So we're literally reducing the cost to acquire and the cost to serve. We're providing reliable regulatory compliance. So this is a big issue in this industry, fundamentally at an industry level. So we have an LOA for every customer. We can track that. We can provide that information. Super compliant company, the way that we run. And number 4, we enhance a supplier's brand and their industry reputation. So think about a supplier who's been in a situation where they couldn't serve somebody with savings, and so that price is going up. Now you've got a massive brand impact for that supplier. Well, our suppliers are only going to be serving our customers if they can help our customers. Therefore, they're always going to be associated with that great experience. And we're going to limit in-contract churn. In-contract churn is really expensive for suppliers. It means people drop before they expected them to. They've already bought that energy. They've hedged that energy. A lot of people don't realize that. They buy energy for the entire term, which means if they lose somebody before the end of their term, they've got energy they don't know how to resell. So 4 very tangible, very quantitative ways that we actually make this work for suppliers, which to me rounds out and just puts the cherry on the top for the case for why this works. If you ever hear about an innovation that's really one-sided, run away. If you hear about something that works for these players but not these guys, and we're just going to hurry and take advantage of this and before these guys figure it out, not a business you want to be in. If you find something that actually works for a really great ecosystem, works for the supplier, works for the consultant, works for the non-switcher, works for the switcher, works for the regulators, that's a business you want to be in. And that's a product you want to take advantage of. So again, 100% is the goal. And I firmly believe, for the reasons that we've talked about, that we will be a disruptor. We will be a huge catalyst for this industry reaching that 100% goal because of our innovation, our customer focus, the fact that we've removed the hassle, and we've got great collaboration. So I really appreciate everybody joining tonight. I know that this is a lot of time commitment for you. I hope it's been a valuable use of your time. I really look forward to working with each and every one of you, whether you're a customer of ours, a consultant of ours, a prospect of ours. I really, really appreciate you taking the time, and I look forward to many, many years of success with veev. So have a great night, everybody, and here's to making life better. Good night.